Mob of the Dead is the 14th map in the Call of Duty Zombies storyline, but in a lot of ways this is where the story begins. Not literally, because there are 13 maps with loads of lore that have come before, but this map is the beginning of the multiverse in zombies. This is where the entire rest of the zombie story begins. The blood vials, the multi-dimensional Richthofen setting all the little things in motion to create the zombie cycle of Black Ops 3, which is broken in Black Ops 4. All of that comes to pass because of 4 mobsters who simply tried to escape the notorious Alcatraz Prison. This is the full story of Mob of the Dead. In the early 1920s, Salvatore Deluca began opening gambling houses all across Chicago. Sal was a shrewd businessman and he knew how things worked in 1920s Chicago. Money talks, and well, Sal let his money do the talking. After bribing the Chicago Police Department, he quickly became one of the most respected and feared crime bosses in Chicago. This was the beginning of the Deluca crime family. With his empire growing so rapidly, Sal needed men he could trust at his side, faithful lieutenants who would follow him to the very end. The first recruit was a vicious and bloodthirsty man named Billy Handsome. Sal would come to look at Billy as the son he never had. Billy was completely dedicated to the crime family and was the family's most prolific and deadly hitman. To increase his profits from the gambling establishments, Sal hires Michael Finn O'Leary, an expert at rigging gambling and sporting events. Finn was a great addition with one exception, a girl. He marries a young starlight named Angelina Bow. The relationship was rocky at best. As the marriage eventually goes down the drain, Angelina seeks for a divorce. Finn tells her lawyer that she can leave the marriage the day she leaves this life. With the help of his new lieutenants, Sal builds his crime empire for many years. The Deluca name becomes one of the most feared and respected in early 1920s Chicago. After many years of successfully bribing the Chicago Police Department, Sal becomes frustrated when they suddenly stop accepting bribes. Perhaps it was this frustration that led to Sal beginning to work with the schemer and con man Albert Arlington. They would eventually just call him the Weasel. Now, anyone with half a brain would stay far away from someone known as the Weasel. Albert was a smooth talker and always had a plan. The Weasel worked primarily out of Los Angeles, which tells us that Sal was looking to expand the borders of his business. We also see the presence of the Deluca crime family and its members scattered around Morgue City. This is the city we visit later in Black Ops 3 on Shadows of Evil. Although we don't know the actual location of this city, this indicates that the Deluca crime family was on the up and up. They were going from city to city. Sal was successful. He had built an empire of crime, but it was never enough for him. It is tough to say if working with the Weasel was bad luck or if it was genuinely just bad timing, but this is where the world begins to come crashing down for Sal and his boys. While on the job for Sal, the Weasel is hospitalized after a heist in LA goes wrong. Using this time that he is laid up in the hospital, Al completes and submits a comic strip called Icarus from Mars. His request is denied for the 3rd time. I don't think this is confirmed, but I like to think that Al thought this was his way out of a life of crime, becoming a famous comic book artist. But alas, this did not work out for him. Sal's plan to move to Los Angeles had been a complete and utter failure. Sal had spread his resources too far, too fast. Angry and frustrated about his crumbling empire, Sal ends the life of a lady of the night. The Chicago Police Department can no longer turn a blind eye to Sal's shenanigans, and they arrest him. With the leader behind bars, it is now open season on Sal's organization. Billy Handsome is arrested under suspicion of taking multiple lives. Finn O'Leary is next to be arrested. His estranged wife gets her revenge because he had refused to sign the divorce papers. She offers up evidence of his crimes and misdeeds to the Chicago Police Department. They happily take this information and lock Finn up. Last and certainly least, Al is arrested for his role in the Los Angeles heist. Sal is found guilty of ending a life and sentenced to life in Alcatraz. Billy is found guilty of taking 116 lives. This makes him, I guess, the most prolific serial killer in Call of Duty Zombies history. He is sentenced to life in Alcatraz. Finn is found guilty of multiple counts of gambling-related fraud and will serve his sentence in Alcatraz. It doesn't say, but I would guess anywhere from 5 to 20 years. Finally, the Weasel is found guilty of grand larceny, grand theft auto, arson, conspiracy, and battery. Al will also serve his sentence inside the walls of Alcatraz. Luckily for them, Sal and his boys are all sentenced to serve time in the same place. Unlucky for them, this was The Rock. To my knowledge, there were only ever 3 men who successfully escaped from Alcatraz. And that's real life, not in the game, so 3 men actually did escape from Alcatraz. And I don't know if it's confirmed, but I think that's the premise of Mob of the Dead, is based on those 3 men who actually did escape Alcatraz. This, however, wouldn't stop Deluca and his boys. The 4 begin their time in Alcatraz. Shortly after they all arrive, Al comes up with the either brilliant or ridiculous plan to build a plane on the rooftop of Alcatraz. With no better plans in front of them, Sal, Billy, and Finn all go along with this plan. Over the next few months, they slowly start gathering parts for the plane. To set this plan in motion, they become friendly with the new guard named Stanley Ferguson. Billy makes friends with the boys in laundry, and they stash parts for him inside of a laundry machine. As the time to escape grows closer, Sal, Finn, and Billy realize that the plan is doomed to fail. They become bitter and decide to take their rage out on the Weasel, who had promised them a way off of the rock. On the night of December 31st, 1933, the three of them lure Al to the rooftop and exact their revenge. Armed only with makeshift weapons, the three men exact a bloody revenge on the poor Weasel. It is not known how he convinced three such hardened criminals to go along with such a ridiculous plan in the first place. Perhaps he had a golden tongue, or perhaps they were just desperate. For this blatant taking of another inmate's life, the three are ultimately given the terrible fate of death by electrocution. They were given the electric chair. As they are electrocuted, their minds, bodies, and spirits are trapped in an eternal loop. This crime seems to have created a pocket dimension, a loop that is still part of the zombies' timeline but behaves differently. To be fair, it might not have been the crime of taking Al's life that created this altered reality. So we will just say that somehow a pocket dimension is formed. We will get into this idea in much more depth as the zombie story goes on, but for now, this is an alternate universe in which a hellish version of Alcatraz exists. It is here that the four mobsters are stuck, both physically and metaphorically. They are forced to relive the night of December 31st. This begins the cycle within Mob of the Dead. Once the mobsters die, they are transported back to the beginning of the cycle. We see Ferguson making his rounds. Sal asks how his family is doing, and not really caring about the answer, Sal replies, "Ain't that swell?" The guard, who is a little too friendly to these terrible men, then asks Finn if he has any tips for Saturday's race. Finn, who is sitting on the throne, assures the guard that he is working on it. At precisely 9:35, Al kicks the plan into motion. He begins his song and dance by pretending to be in pain. Al successfully lures the unsuspecting guard into his cell. Al is wielding a shank and uses it on Ferguson. Now in possession of the keys, Al lets the other three out of their cells. Billy had somehow stolen 4 revolvers from the warden's private collection. He distributes them among the other 3. It is here, at this point, that the night takes a drastic turn from the original night that cursed them all. Instead of the 4 of them heading to the roof, where Sal, Billy, and Finn beat the Weasel, they now begin to hear groans and shambling footsteps from the cell where the body of Ferguson should have been lying. They are shocked to find Ferguson on his feet. Al insists that he finish the guard as the others tell him he has forgotten how to get stuff done. It is apparent, however, that something is not right. In fact, the 4 men can sense it. They can be heard commenting that this is not right. They sense that something is off. They all unload their weapons into the new zombie guard, only to find that there are many more zombies. Thus begins the epic fight for their survival. In the opening cinematic, we witness each of the 4 men fall to the zombies. We finally get to the beginning of round 1 inside Mob of the Dead. Upon loading into the map, we see that our characters are now not among the living. As we just witnessed, each of them was killed seconds ago. They are now part of an unending cycle. They can never truly die, not at this point in the story at least. The 4 mobsters now shift between the physical and ethereal world. They are still trapped inside the prison, somewhere between life and death. Although they are technically dead, the mobsters believe that escape is still possible. They traverse the haunted halls of the prison to find that they are not only besieged by zombies, but a warden who is hellbent on, well, keeping them in hell. They believe this entity to be the guard they had befriended and betrayed, Stanley Ferguson. For the time being, who this is doesn't matter, but this idea will be revisited later in Blood of the Dead. Not knowing what else to do, the mobsters stick to the plan. They go on a quest to find 5 parts for the plane that Weasel called Icarus, after the main character in his comics. As they search the prison, they find all 5 parts in the following locations. The uniforms, which are used for the wings, were stashed in the washing machine right where Billy's boys said they would be. The rigging can be found at the bottom of an elevator shaft in the Citadel tunnels. The engine for the plane can be found in a locked room near the warden's office. The valves are found locked away in a glass case, and the tank is found down by the docks. They board the flying contraption, and it appears that they are going to finally escape the island of Alcatraz. That is until they collide with the Golden Gate Bridge. Maybe it was some supernatural power that forced them to crash into the bridge, or possibly they just could not steer the contraption. Either way, the plane crashes into the bridge and the men fall. On the bridge, they find a strange pack-a-punch machine along with 4 electric chairs. Above the chairs is a haunting message written in blood: "No one escapes alive." So was it a trap set by the devilish prison guard, or was it possibly just an extension of the purgatory, a reminder of their sins? A way for them to be punished for their crimes? Honestly, we don't know for sure, and neither did Sal and his boys. Doing the only thing left for them to do, they strap into the electric chairs. A lightning bolt from the clouds above strikes the bridge, which carries the charge to each of the 4 men, electrocuting them. After the shock of being shocked, the mobsters once again find themselves inside the walls of Alcatraz. This highlights the grim reality for Sal, Finn, Billy, and Al. They are now all eternally tied to the prison. They are doomed to relive this experience for an excruciatingly unknown amount of time. That is, until something breaks the cycle. We'll get to that point in a minute. Now back inside the prison, the crew finds fuel canisters scattered around the prison. They fuel up the plane and once again fly themselves to freedom. And once again, they collide with the Golden Gate Bridge. This becomes an exercise in futility. They again try to fly from the island and again, for the 3rd time, collide with the bridge. After shocking themselves once again, they find themselves back inside the prison. Throughout the prison, they find drawings of a haunting hound on the walls, a Cerberus. They discover that feeding the Cerberus a certain amount of zombies will sate the hunger of the dogs. After feeding all 3 heads of the Cerberus, they are rewarded with a new tactical weapon called the Hell's Retriever. Using the Hell's Retriever, they uncover a hidden secret behind a movie poster, a spork used by a poor soul attempting to dig out of Alcatraz. They enter the afterlife and shock the spork. They find that it has relocated to the cafeteria and are able to retrieve it with the tomahawk that acts like a boomerang. The last weapon they discover, which greatly boosts their arsenal against the undead, is a weapon right out of the warden's own private collection, the Blundergat. A powerful and brutal weapon that can be further upgraded with an acid kit that distracts zombies before exploding. Up to this point, they have found that their physical bodies are not able to leave the island, but perhaps the spirit or ethereal part of them will be able to leave the island. However, before they are allowed to leave, they must first discover what actually occurred to them on the night this repeating nightmare began. Using a number panel they find at the bottom of the catacombs, they insert each of their 4 prisoner numbers: 872, 101, 386, and 481. Performing this action seems to open up their minds, or perhaps it informs some unknown entity that they are ready to learn the truth of what actually happened to them on the night of December 31st, 1933. We do not understand the forces that make such a discovery possible, but scattered around the prison, Sal and his troubled gang find audio recordings of the guard they had befriended and betrayed, Stanley Ferguson. Stanley tells the story of the mobsters, how they came to Alcatraz and ultimately chose to follow the foolish plan of Albert Arlington to fly off the island. Stanley chronicles the events of that fateful night, the betrayal and beating of the Weasel, and the lead-up in the coming weeks to the electrocution of Sal, Finn, and Billy. Now armed with the knowledge of how this all came to be, Sal, Finn, Billy, and the Weasel enter the afterlife one more time. They board the plane, this time as spectral passengers. Whether or not the hope was that they would sail right past the Golden Gate Bridge or not, they were sorely mistaken. The plane collides with the Golden Gate Bridge one final time. Finding their physical bodies strapped into the electric chairs, they revive themselves and await for what is to come. Now on the bridge with their physical bodies and hopefully powerful weapons they found along the way, Sal, Finn, and Billy discover one more betrayal. The Weasel turns out to be in cahoots with the zombies and the demonic warden. The former allies pitted against each other, Sal, Finn, and Billy fight against the zombies, the warden, and the Weasel. 2 possible outcomes come from this confrontation. If Sal, Finn, and Billy are once again successful in besting Albert, we discover that the cycle continues. This is seen as the bad ending, as it continues the cycle of purgatory for our characters. The mobsters will begin their unnatural cycle of death and resurrection over and over again. However, if the Weasel is triumphant, it is explained that the cycle is broken. This is seen as the good ending. With the original events of the mobsters changed, history has also changed. The breaking of the cycle will come into much more importance as we begin to discuss the events of Black Ops 4 Zombies, particularly the events of the map Blood of the Dead. This to me is the beauty of the Mob of the Dead ending, or even the zombie storyline. You ultimately get to choose how it ends. Will you break the cycle, or continue playing the same map and same story over and over again, just like the characters in the game? It is revealed to us later that Richtofen was working with the Illuminati. He convinces them to build a laboratory beneath Alcatraz. Richtofen will use this as a storage and meetup location. Richtofen manages to get his hands on a book that has written inside of it all the events that will unfold in the zombies' timeline. This is called the Chronorium. It is here that he learns he must collect blood samples from Sal and Finn before they die. Richtofen travels through a portal back in time to before the mobsters were sent to the electric chair. He collects their blood samples and delivers them to a younger version of himself. We are technically getting ahead of ourselves, but I thought we should at least mention the blood vials because they are one of the central points of Black Ops 3 Zombies. Overall, the cycle is eventually broken and we will see the mobsters again, albeit in spiritual form. This happens later in the Black Ops 4 Zombies map, Blood of the Dead. That was a lot, I know, but my friends, this has been the story of Mob of the Dead.